Good evening. Welcome to Delta Talks, Community Conversation Series. I am Jacqueline Tyson, President of the Rochester Alumnae Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, Incorporated. Our focus today is police accountability. Before we get started, I'd like to share a little history about our organization. Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, Incorporated, founded 108 years ago at Howard University, is a nonpartisan organization of college-educated women committed to public service with a primary focus on the Black community. The Rochester Alumnae Chapter, chartered in 1965, serves Greater Rochester with programs that reflect a 5-point programmatic thrust, including economic development, educational development, international awareness and involvement, physical and mental health, and political awareness and involvement. Dr. Charmaine Cohen and Dr. Donna Harris will be the moderators for this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, President Tyson. I am Dr. Cohen. Hello to the Rochester community. Thank you for joining us tonight. As you know, the topic is police accountability. This is a significant issue in our community and nationally. Today, we will interview a panel of individuals who have been involved with police accountability. Rochester has been engaged in this area for a number of years with the Civilian Review Board process, and now through the establishment of the Police Accountability Board, PAB. We are looking forward to a rich dialogue. Let me just share, we have a few of our members of the Social Action Committee, Ms. Dorset Watson, co-chair, Ms. Jacqueline McClaney, Dr. Gail Harrison, and Ms. Carnithia Melson. Now I will give over to Dr. Harris, my co-moderator. You're muted, Dr. Harris.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Cohen. We're looking forward to this important conversation. First, allow me to introduce our guests. Mr. Frank Liberty, representing the Civilian Review Board. Mr. Liberty, can you wave to the audience?
Yes, glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Mr. Anthony Cowart, representing the Police Accountability Board Alliance. Did you wave, Mr. Cowart? We have Ms. Shawnee Wilson, representing the Police Accountability Board. Welcome. Wave to the audience.
Hi, thank you for having us.
And we have Mr. A.J. Derwin, Esquire, representing the Police Accountability Board Alliance, and he will provide us with a legal perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. So let's just get started. And I'd like to ask my first question to Mr. Liberty from the Civilian Review Board. Now, we know that the Civilian Review Board falls under the Center for Dispute Settlement. Can you please share how this board evolved, when it started, and what is its current function?
Yes, thank you. The Center for Dispute Settlement has been involved in oversight for law enforcement going back to the late 1970s, when shortly after Denise Hawkins, a young African-American woman, was shot and killed by a white police officer, and the community reached out.
Mr. Cowart, as a member of the Police Accountability Board Alliance, and there is a difference between Alliance and the Police Accountability Board, okay, but can you talk about the organization's current function? You're muted.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you, Delta Sigma Theta, for allowing me this opportunity to participate in this forum. And to get back to your question, What we have done, we set up programs for folks to come into the organization. We have bylaws, committee admin, outreach. I'm muted. Oh, okay. We have PAB and nominations committees, and we have other committees also. And what we try to do is involve the community in what we're doing. And as far as the outreach is concerned, if you want to become a member of the PAB, basically what you have to do is fill out an application. It comes to a review board. They review it. And if you're selected, they do an interview process. And then after that, they vote on it. And then from that point on, you become a member of the PAB.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Now, when they are viewing applications and interviewing, are they looking for a specific background in law enforcement? What are they looking for in a person who wants to be a part of the committee?
Basically, anybody in the Rochester city can be a member of the PAB. You can have a background. You can have a background if you've been involved with the police. If you've been involved with the legal court system. What we're trying to be is very inclusive on who we have here in this organization, because people of the community will be the best persons to actually come into this program and talk to what we need, what our needs are.
And if you could just clarify for the community, for the Alliance, can you name a few of those committees?
All right, one of the committees is bylaws, which is probably the most, I would call the most important one. Then we have the admin. Admin is one of the ones folks, they look at the applications. We have an outreach program, which we can go out and seek out information from individuals. And the research committee also does something. And then we have the nominating committee also. And what they normally do is they bring in, people come in with applications, they look at them, and then they say, well, this person can do it or this person can't do it. And then they're the ones that kind of dictate to us if we want to have that individual as far as a member of the PAB.
Okay, great. And if they wanted to get an application, would they just go to your website for that?
It is on the website.
Okay.
It's in a PDF form. Feel free to pick it up. And we're always looking for folks to refresh, because there's always individuals who may have other obligations when they get on the PABA. So we want to make sure we have members that we can always refresh, the ones who are leaving or seek other information, other obligations.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Coer, for the information.
You're welcome.
So, Mr. Derwin, you are also a member of the Police Accountability Board Alliance. Can you provide us insight on the purpose for establishing the Police Accountability Board Alliance?
Yes. So the purpose of the Alliance was to bring together a collection of community groups around Rochester, first to campaign for the establishment of the Police Accountability Board, and then to nominate and select individuals to serve on the Police Accountability Board. And I think one of the reasons how the Alliance has been so effective is by bringing together all these different local organizations to show City Council how popular the PAB proposal was, and to utilize the expertise in the network of all those organizations to spread the word around town about what the PAB is and why it was needed. And so then once the PAB became established, both through the City Council vote and through the votes of the people of Rochester, the Alliance helped select and nominate people to sit on the board and continues to educate and engage the public about police accountability issues.
So can you just provide insight about whether individuals or organizations can become members of the Alliance?
Yes, both organizations and individuals can become members of the Alliance. I know one of the things the Alliance is always looking for are individuals who are affected or have a stake in how policing is done in the city. And so there's a lot of people and organizations around town who meet that description, but any organization that feels like they want to have a say in how policing is happening in Rochester, they can reach out to the Alliance via our website and see about how they can become a member of the Alliance.
Thank you. So we've been talking about the Police Accountability Board Alliance that really played a role in the establishment of the Police Accountability Board, let's turn to Ms. Wilson. And as the chair of the Police Accountability Board, can you share what is the PAB and what is its current function?
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me tonight. So to get into, to kind of pick up where the Police Accountability Board Alliance left off, we are a 9-member board that is currently serving to, change police reform here in Rochester. We were basically a referendum that the Police Accountability Board Alliance worked very hard to put forward, was passed in November, I think it was November 20th, 2020. So that we can now exist. And so now what we're doing is we are working on 2019, excuse me, and that's November 5th. But basically what this civilian-led oversight board, Frank talked about it in the 1960s, but now we have, we have 5 pillars that we operate within. And I'll just read those off for you all so that you all can get a general overview of what we do. We are an independent agency of city government that is separate from the Rochester Police Department. We have the power to independently investigate complaints of police misconduct. One of our pillars, the 3rd pillar, is that we have subpoena power to compel the production of evidence and witnesses. The 4th is that we have disciplinary power. And the 5th is to the power to review and evaluate police department patterns, practices and policies, procedures, and recommend systemic changes and prevent in order from misconduct from happening in the first place. So, we are we're a 9-member board. The Police Accountability Board Alliance provides 4 seats. City Council provides 4 seats, and then there's 1 mayoral appointee. So our current function is now, since we are in litigation regarding our right to subpoena and the disciplinary matrix in court, the Locust Club has challenged that the very first day of our meeting, I think in February 2020. Rochester City Council has gone to court on our behalf. We recently lost the New York State Appellate Court case, but we are appealing to the Supreme Court of New York State. And Judge Ark ruled, this was just a ruling that just came out a couple of weeks ago. So we are, but that doesn't mean at all that we don't have powers, right? We talked about 5 pillars, and the power to subpoena officers and the power to discipline officers is one part of a very rich matrix that we're in. So we are already looking at their policies and procedures right now. As you can tell across the country, there's an outcry for a thorough examination of police policy and procedure. A lot of it is, when we talk about a weed in the ground, if you see a dandelion popping up in a field, you see a dandelion, but really you should be looking underneath for the root, right? The root is what we're after. Discipline is the flower. And so when we talk about pulling all of that up, we want all of it out. So policy and procedure is a huge part of that. So that's one of the things that we're beginning to examine now. One of the biggest part of our day right now, and the day-to-day, is the working group for the governor's order, executive order 203, which was brought into place by Governor Cuomo in response to George Floyd's death. And so really what that was is he wanted all cities in New York State to come up with a comprehensive review of their police department, how it can be changed, and then ideas on police reform with community input folded into that as well. That will be submitted to the governor's office on April 1st. And so Police Accountability Board, we are all Police Accountability Board, the Rochester Police Department, United Christian Leadership Ministry, and the Races Commission. We're all given questions from the governor's office in order to answer about, policing. Not all those answers on policing as it encompasses policing, as it's a huge undertaking, right? They only took bits and pieces, like nothing when the Locust Club was there, nothing about police unions were in the actual questions, but just about a general idea of what policing in Rochester is like. And so we were all given questions to answer. We were able to answer those, give a general overview by looking at available data that was available, that was stuff that we could look up online, research, and then we were able to provide answers to the working group. So everybody's answers are due at the end of the month, and we will be then going and meeting with the mayor and city mayor and the rest of the working group to finalize those answers for the governor. So that's, and then we just finished I think yesterday, we had a public meeting and forum talking with community, because the Police Accountability Board does not exist without community. And so we have made it a very special intention, and it is part of our charter that we have a very unique charge on vulnerability and community input, to make sure that we get community input in everything that we do. And that also includes the governor's order. So, from the beginning, we've been going to community organizations, getting their input, talking to them on the ground. And then, our community input ends on the 15th. And then once the governor's order, what part of the governor's order is that, then that will fold into the actual working group as a whole, putting all their answers, research out there for the rest of the community to look at it as a whole. And that will continue. That will start in February. So that's what we're up to right now. We are busy. We are running around, and but we're happy. We're really excited about doing this police work in Rochester. It's so very important. So.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Wilson. I'll come back to you in a little bit because I'd like for you to share some information from that meeting. I had the opportunity to listen to the presentation. It was very, very informative, but we'll circle back around to you, okay? Mr. Liberty, so we've heard from Ms. Wilson about what the PAB is currently doing and how they are establishing, getting community input and answering those questions. So they are on the way. So in the meantime, and in the between time, can you share with us what is the current process to handle cases right now through the Civilian Review Board until they get fully established? How does it work now?
Yeah, so in our role under City Council legislation, as I mentioned before, that goes back to the early 1990s and has been essentially unchanged except for a couple of minor tweaks over the last 30 years. We still operate under those same restrictions and legislative restrictions. So we serve as an alternate complaint intake site. So people can go to the police professional standards section, that's their internal affairs office, and file a complaint. But that's pretty intimidating to file a police complaint to a police officer.
Right.
So we provide an alternate place because we're an independent nonprofit. We don't sit in any police office. We have our own offices in downtown Rochester. People can, or if people can't get to us, we'll go to them to help them craft their complaint, and then we can shepherd them through the complaint process. And our charge in this work is to make sure that every complaint gets a fair, a thorough, and a timely investigation. Now, those investigations are conducted by internal affairs. So once a high-profile complaint, and by high profile, any complaint that has an allegation of excessive force, racial profiling, unlawful behavior by a police officer, any complaint that has that one of those allegations or more of those allegations gets a full investigation by the professional standards section. Once they complete their investigation, that then comes back to the Center for Dispute Settlement, where we put together a 3-person panel of citizens from Rochester to review that. Now, what makes our program unique, actually unique in the country, is that the panelists who come from our own city are also trained, certified mediators. Because as you'll remember, the heart of the work that we do as an organization at the Center for Dispute Settlement is to train and certify neutral mediators. And we do that under the auspices of the New York State Judiciary's guidance, the Office of Alternate Dispute Resolution. So all of our panelists are certified mediators, first of all, trained to set aside any biases that they may or may not have, so that we can ensure that they're going to be reviewing these investigations in a fair manner. Any city resident who's a certified mediator who expresses interest then would be interested in becoming a panelist for the Civilian Review Board. They go through an interview process to assess their suitability. If they pass that, then they go through additional rigorous training. It's a 40-hour training of civil rights and responsibilities, police and understanding police policies and procedures, and also the civil service system, so that they're going to be sitting in judgment of whether a police officer acted properly or not. So they need that background information to understand what's expected of a police officer. So when that panel gets that, and actually I spent 5 hours today reviewing a case. The panel sits and reviews those complaint investigations, and then must render a finding for each allegation. There are 3 panelists, and in order to have an official panelist finding, it takes 2 of the 3 panelists, or a unanimous decision to render each finding. And the finding is either guilty or not guilty, which is they sustain the complaint that the incident that the person complained of actually occurred and it was improper. That would be a sustained complaint. Or the situation as related in the complaint occurred, but it was within policies and procedures, and that would exonerate the officer. Or if there wasn't enough independent evidence to prove or disprove whether that happened, and the standard that we use is the standard of preponderance of evidence, just anything more than 50%, whether you can make a determination. If there's no independent evidence, that would lead to an unprovable finding. And then last one would be, if there's evidence that the allegation didn't actually happen, then it would be an unfounded finding. So once those panelists come to their independent review and their finding, then and only then do they look at their finding compared to the internal affairs finding for each of those allegations. If there's a discrepancy between the panelists' findings and the internal affairs findings, the panelists, we must articulate our rationale as to where we disagree with them. Okay. In reviewing those investigations, panelists also had the opportunity, if there is something that looked amiss, that wasn't actually an allegation brought forward by a complaint, and the panelists have the opportunity to bring that forward as an additional allegation of wrongdoing. In addition to that, once they make all their findings and all the recommendations on each allegation, the panelists have the opportunity to make a policy, a procedure recommendation, a training recommendation, or a investigative recommendation. That all that information then goes to the deciding official, which in this case is the chief of police, for his or her decision as to that would be the official decision. That's the way the process works now. And I'll reiterate, during this transition to the PAB, we are still continuing to be a complaint intake site. We're still continuing to serve as Civilian Review Board review panels, and continuing to do the public outreach that is part of our charge.
Okay, wow. Thank you. So let me just kind of summarize for the community that's listening right now. So if someone has an issue or a complaint, the process is this. They will contact Center for Dispute Settlement, okay? And then they will get assigned an individual that will help them craft the complaint, guide them and support them through the process. Then it will start the investigation. And then you will have 3 individuals who've gone through training to sit and review the complaint. And then you need 2 out of 3 to either find something unfounded or say something is not enough evidence or say that this action falls within policy or the complaint is sustained. So you have to have 2 out of 3 to agree on each allegation. Okay, I think I missed a step. So once that's done, then it goes to the internal affairs or it goes directly to the police chief?
It goes to internal affairs and then it's transferred to the police chief for her final decision at this point.
Okay, all right, very good. Thank you, thank you. Let's see, my next question is, okay, so we know that the PAB is moving quickly, things are in place, powers are being established. So what is the timeline as to when, and maybe Ms. Wilson, you can chime in on this too, but what is the timeline as to when the Civilian Review Board will phase out completely and PAB will now be the official organization to take complaints? And Mr. Liberti, if you can answer that first.
I think the legislation says that the Civilian Review Board, as it stands now, will phase out within 60 days of the Police Accountability Board becoming active. Shani might know more directly, and I really don't know what to anticipate as far as that timeline.
Yeah, so I guess what I'll say to that is that, we are still, because of the litigation and our development of a disciplinary matrix that's on hold, we don't have a way to discipline officers at this time. So people are looking for, for their cases to be heard. We don't have the ability to do that yet. And until we have the ability to, like, we're still in litigation, for instance, we're, appealing to the Supreme Court, we will have to have investigators, disciplinary matrix set up, and then we can hear complaints. And so we're still working through that process and it's still not done yet. So until that happens, the Center for Dispute Settlement will be taking cases.
Thank you.
I would add just a couple of things.
Sure.
So we'll continue to do the work that we've done, for all these years. And at the same time, we recognize that the PAB coming into this work, we're working hand in hand as best we can to ensure that the transition is smooth. In fact, just yesterday, Connor, the executive director, and I did a presentation for the New York State Bar Association, specifically on oversight in law enforcement specific to Rochester. So we're working closely with a number of community groups and trying to help shepherd the incoming Police Accountability Board as best we can.
Thank you. That's good to know that our two organizations that are very important to our community are working together. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Harris, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, so we're going to pivot back to the Police Accountability Board Alliance, and Mr. Derwin started to talk about the establishment of the PAB. But Mr. Cowart, can you talk based upon experience, because I know you've been involved with the Alliance early on. And so how was the PAB involved with the Alliance involved with the establishment of the PAB? And can you just talk about kind of what were some of the activities, the advocacy activities to ultimately get the city council to pass the legislation and then it go up for vote, and what work was done around that?
Okay, basically what we did was we came down to the chamber when they were having their open meetings, and we didn't act up, but we wanted them to know that we were there. A lot of times, they were saying, well, this group is going to phase out. We wanted to make it a point that we're not going to phase out. We were here to stay, and we're here to protect the community. And a lot of times folks just still didn't understand why we were there. They called us agitators, and we still persisted on. And then finally, what we wound up happening is they realized that we weren't going anywhere, so they adopted the program. That means we had to go through the chamber members, and they, we had one that grasped it on really well, fast. Then the other ones grasped it. And then all of a sudden, everybody started to want to get a hold of this here and take it with us. So basically what we wound up doing, we had signs out, and basically we just had signs out and we went out Matter of fact, we went door to door when we was finally, our final piece was coming, to knock on doors to let folks know it was coming up. There was some resistance from the RPD, but we still persisted on. And then there was a vote on it. And overwhelmingly, we got what, 51% of that? And just to let them know, no, it wasn't 51%. It was a 3-1, I think. Am I right on that, AJ?
It was
Yeah, it was
75%.
75% of the city voted in favor of the PAB.
It was a 3-1 vote, which indicated that the city really wanted that. And from that point on, we've been moving forward from that. We're still trying to get folks to join the alliance group, and we'll take just about anybody. We're not saying that to be, I'm not saying that to be negative. We just want to make sure that we have folks. And basically, you have strength in numbers. And one of the things about the alliance is when you go as a person, as one person, they don't listen to you. And that's one of the reasons why we got this passed, because we went in a large group. And the large group made it a point to let folks know that we were out here. We told our friends, we told our fraternities, we told our sororities, we told the Masons, we told the Eastern Stars. Everybody kind of pitched in and did this. So this was not just a one person effort, it was a group effort to make sure that we were doing this the right way.
So the alliance was really pretty active, especially with engaging in the community and making sure all of the community understood what was at stake regarding the vote around the establishment of the Police Accountability Board. So I also want to ask you, how does the alliance select representatives to serve on the PAB? Ms. Wilson talked about the Police Accountability Alliance has 4 nominations of the 9 members on the board. So can you talk about the process of once people get the application and send it in, what are the steps that the alliance goes through in selecting representatives?
Are you talking about the PAB or the PABA?
I'm talking about how the alliance helps select representatives for the Police Accountability Board.
Okay. All right. Basically, what we do is we get the applications in, we review them. And it's quite it's a review group that does that. It's a nomination committee. It goes through the panel, reads it, makes a selection. Either we want this person or we don't want this person. Believe it or not, we don't try to get rid of folks. We want to make sure that we're inclusive instead of exclusive. So basically what we do is we look at the applications, then we move from there. Once that happens, the group votes on it. Do we want this individual in? And then from there, we invite them in for an interview. And from there, the interview process, they come in and do the interview process. And they, we just kind of have a fireside chat just to make sure that we're on the same page as far as what we're thinking. From there, they leave, it comes back to the group, and we vote on it. And basically that's it. If they get in, they get in. And we try to put them in some kind of a group so that we can keep them active. Because what happens is, if you're in a group and you're not doing anything, you have a tendency to want to fall off. So the more we can get people moving, the easier it is for them to stay with us. And we have a pretty active group. We have Zoom meetings, we have a working group, and we have an alliance group.
Thank you so much. So the alliance does lots of work with the selection of representatives for the Police Accountability Board. Can you just let people know where they can go and get an application if they're interested in being nominated for the Police Accountability Board?
It is on the website that we have. It's listed on PAB. You can do Police Accountability Board. It's there. It's in various places. I do know they have a PF file for that. And once you fill the application out, you can send it back electronically. We can mail it back. We can just walk it into us. Probably faster if you do the electronic piece. That way you can get to it. Then it goes to the review board, as I said earlier. And we move from there.
Thank you so much. And we'll share information about how people can connect with each organization at the end. Dr. Cohen.
Thank you. Mr. Liberty, I'd like to revisit a statement you made earlier when you described the process. You said that there would be 3 people civilians, who will take a look at that particular case. My question to you is, you mentioned that there's bias training that everyone goes through. Do you try and make sure those 3 individuals represent Rochester? Is it diverse? Do we have men, women, all women, Hispanic, African American? How does that work?
Yeah, yes, they are all City of Rochester residents. As I mentioned, the system that we operate under is relatively unchanged since since the early 90s. One of the changes that was made was that prior to 2014, our panelists came from anywhere in Monroe County. Now, keep in mind about the bias training aspect. They get that bias training as part of their basic mediator skills training, and then they will go through an apprenticeship to finally get certified as a certified neutral mediator. So there's a lot of emphasis on setting aside bias in that basic mediation training. So then they take this additional training in police policies and procedures and civil rights and civil service law, and so those panelists prior to 2014 came from Monroe County. In 2014, one change that was adopted by council was that we restricted that to only city residents.
Mm-hmm.
So our panel actually has shrunk because of that. But it's always been a diverse panel. I would say anecdotally, usually heavier with women and heavier with minorities than men, white men.
Okay, all right. Thank you for sharing that and clarifying. Ms. Wilson, you mentioned earlier, you outlined the 5 pillars for the Police Accountability Board. And then you also talked about the subpoena power within that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later with Mr. Derwin. Like I mentioned, a couple of days ago, you had a very impressive presentation from your board to the community. Can you share some of the research that you highlighted on there and the data? I believe that would be very informative to our community that are listening right now.
I'm getting there. Hi. Okay.
Okay.
So yes, so really this is just general data that was available on online. I mean, these the statistics that we were looking for, we did actually talk to the Monroe County Public Defender's Office, especially on one specifically to broken windows policing, which I can explain. We also looked at just the general data from just from what we were able to find. I know. So there are some public records that are available from the Rochester Police Department. We were able to actually glean quite a bit from that. We actually also look at some national statistics already. Also, like for instance, when we talked about how we are one of the most policed cities in the country. And the only city that beats us is Birmingham, Alabama, which is interesting, right? Considering the history. So
we're number 2. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're number 2. And, the size of our Rochester Police Department gets larger while our city resident population gets smaller, and we kind of highlighted the fact, which we all do here, we're rich in history here, but we highlighted the fact and we wondered if that had to do with the increase in the Black population after the Great Migration, why there were so many, why the police numbers increased while the actual population decreased. So that's just one instance, right? We just kind of got that together. Secondly, the I'll highlight the broken windows policing. That's kind of that umbrella term where, we talk about people being arrested for, or people getting ticketed for, failing to turn, people being stopped and ticketed for, not having a bell on their bike, people having, so just those two things, like stop and frisk, like that was seen in New York City. We have those like shooting at a moving vehicle. So really, from the Monroe County Public Defender's Office, the bells on bikes we found from their data was that the majority of those that were stopped for that issue were Black and brown people, disproportionately. And so there's, so yeah, we really, a lot of this, we really didn't have to do a lot of digging for. So that was really great.
Thank you for that information. Mr. Darwin, we're going to draw on your legal knowledge, and we're going to turn to the court case that Ms. Wilson talked about regarding the disciplinary powers of the PAB and the subpoena powers. Can you give us status of the court case and provide some insights about what are the meanings of the findings by Judge Ark and what are the implications moving forward?
Sure. So just by way of background, the police union, the Rochester Police Locust Club, they're called, they sued the city to try to prevent the PAB from operating. And not only did they challenge the powers of the PAB, particularly discipline, they also tried to prevent the city of Rochester from even being able to vote on it. And originally, the judge at the lowest court level, Judge Ark, he ruled that the city shouldn't even be allowed to vote on it. Ultimately, that decision was overturned on appeal, and the city was able to vote on it. Thereafter, Judge Ark issued another decision in which he said that the PAB's disciplinary power was unlawful. And now that decision has been appealed up to the appellate division. And my understanding is that we're still waiting on a decision, though I don't think, did Shani, did she mention a decision had come down? I checked the website today, I didn't see one. There's no been decision from the appellate division, has there?
I thought there was a decision from the appellate division. So I thought that we were going to go ahead and appeal, but maybe I'm incorrect.
So yeah, well, let me, so either way, so there's not on there's the New York courts has an e-filing website where you can look all at the documentation from the case. You can read all the briefs and everything. And I looked there earlier today and did not see a decision there. That said, maybe a decision was issued, but just not uploaded yet. I'm not sure about that. Either way, what we were waiting to see is what the appellate division was going to do with respect to the Police Accountability Board's disciplinary power. And needless to say, whichever side loses at the appellate division is likely to appeal up to the highest court in New York State, and that's the Court of Appeals. Whether the police union loses or the city of Rochester loses, we expect it to go up to the Court of Appeals, which will ultimately give a decision about whether the Police Accountability Board can lawfully have disciplinary power over the Rochester Police Department. Obviously, as a member of the Alliance and advocate for the Police Accountability Board, I think there's strong legal reason to believe that the board does have the power to discipline officers based on a line of Court of Appeals cases, which is said in some other contexts, local communities should be able to retain control over police disciplinary matters. Now, ultimately, that's out of my hands now. It's up to the appellate division, ultimately the Court of Appeals in New York to decide. And so those are the decisions we're waiting on.
So I guess one of the things that I think community would be concerned about is what if, how long is it going to take to go through all of these appeals? And if in the end, the Police Accountability Board, if they find that they don't have the ability to provide discipline, does that mean that the Police Accountability Board will go away?
Right. So in terms of how long it might take, that's a little bit of a guessing game. I will say the Police Accountability Board was passed by the city voters in 2019. It is now the beginning of 2021, and we still do not have an answer yet. And so it could easily be another year or so before we get a final answer from the Court of Appeals in New York, the highest court in New York State. Now, if the Court of Appeals were to find that discipline was for some reason unlawful for the Police Accountability Board, the PAB could still exist and still operate, just without that disciplinary power. Now, disciplinary power was one of the 5 pillars that we originally campaigned on, and we think is an absolutely vital tool for the PAB to be as effective as it can be. But there's still a lot of things the PAB could do even if they didn't have that disciplinary power. They still have the power to review policies and procedures and to make recommended changes to City Council, and they've already begun that process. Even if disciplinary power in and of itself were not available, the board might still be able to investigate complaints and make recommended disciplinary findings, even if their findings aren't binding. So even without disciplinary power, there's still other things the PAB can do. That said, I think disciplinary power is very important to the PAB, and I expect ultimately the Court of Appeals to affirm the PAB's power to discipline officers in Rochester.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Harris,
Yes.
before you ask the last question, can we please ask Ms. Wilson if she can review those pillars again one more time?
Sure. Yep, I can do that. So, so I just wanted to say something real quick as well. You know, the PAB is not going anywhere. We are a form of government here in Rochester. It is what that is. And, you know, whether or not we have 5 pillars or 4 pillars doesn't take away the power for to create lasting change here in Rochester, which is what this city needs. And again, I will stress that, you know, discipline is very important because people want to feel heard, seen, and validated with the experiences that they've had here in Rochester with Rochester Police. However, you know, policy and procedure, folks, is the meat of what we're trying to dig into here. It is the biggest thing that we can do to influence changes. We see them every day. We saw them last week, and how a breakdown in policy and procedure killed people in Washington, D.C. Right. So make no mistake, you know, it's easy, you know, easy pickings to take discipline out of the equation. But when it comes to actually, you know, I would rather have a policy that would completely change the culture of our PD to make sure that they would never have an issue in the first place. Then we can at least start there. So I just wanted to say that real quick. Okay. So, all right, let me just go over these again. So the first pillar was an independent agency of city government, separate from the Rochester Police Department. Second is the power to independently investigate complaints of police misconduct. The third is the subpoena power to compel the production of evidence and witnesses. Fourth is disciplinary power. Fifth is the power to review and evaluate police department patterns, practices, policies, and procedures, and recommend systemic changes to prevent misconduct from occurring in the first place.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Dr. Harris, did you have a final question before?
Yes, and this question goes to all panelists. We have about a minute a piece if you would like to respond. What do you need the community to know or do to help your organization's mission, whether it's the Police Accountability Board, Police Accountability Board Alliance, whether it's the Center for Dispute Settlement? Is it that you need the community to know or do to support you?
I guess if it's okay if I can start. So I think that we need the community to well, first of all, engage with the PAB. You know, we're on Facebook. We have a working group session that is geared towards getting their input, and we need your input. You know, and I listen, I understand that, you know, we have a legacy here of, you know, committees, you know, commissions and working groups that, you know, really didn't turn out to really produce lasting change here. But, you know, I really do want the citizens of Rochester to know that this is different. You all created this. We would not exist without you. There are 40 different to 50 different organizations that tirelessly worked since 2017 to make sure that we are here. And so with that in mind, I would hope that that would set us apart. You know, I know we have to prove ourselves as 9 people, but I hope that that would set us apart in that way. So really it's about community input, community engagement. You know, we are excited and working every day, honestly, to make sure that this goes well and that this exists and that we can be very transparent with you all. So I guess that's what I'd say is community.
Thank you.
If something does happen to you, you need to get down to and fill out an application. That's the only way this committee is going to be able to work right. If you don't let us know, it's not going to be effective. Use the analogy of, we always say one bad apple, and we always use that analogy, but that one bad apple can spoil the whole group. And so what we need to do is to get rid of that individual or individuals and make the group good. That's what the PAB was basically set up for. And I think the last thing I'm going to say basically is, we're here to help the community. All right. We cannot do this by ourselves. Come out, join us, and support us. And we're not talking of financial support. We're talking bodies coming to the meetings and letting us know how you feel.
All right, and if I may go, are you done, Anthony? Yep. Okay. So one thing that I think is important to sort of, if you're interested in this topic and want to try to help contribute to it, is continue to hold public officials and city councilors accountable, because the PAB could be rendered ineffectual overnight if with a changing political persuasion, if new city council members or new public officials come in and want to take it down a peg. For example, if city council refuses to provide sufficient funding for the PAB to operate, that's a really important issue right now. And so I would ask that everyone who's interested in this topic to stay engaged and to stay on your city council member about how they're voting on things like PAB funding and on other issues related to the PAB, based on statements from the chair, Ms. Wilson, who's talked about what the PAB needs to get the ball rolling. Pay attention to what the PAB is saying and what they need, and ask your city council members to support those things.
And I can say that regardless of what transpires, the Center for Dispute Settlement will stay true to our original mission, which is now needed as much as it was when we were having such divisiveness in the early 1970s. I will say one of the questions I thought I was going to be asked, and I think it just ties into what I just heard Mr. Derwin say, Anthony and Channing, is that your power, like our legislative power in doing this, comes from City Council. Stay close to City Council. If there are challenges, and I mentioned that the legislation we work under had 2 minor changes in 30 years. That is not because we didn't ask for programs to be changed and enhanced. And I could real quickly, from 2010, 2012, 2014, 2016, 17, we made program enhancement recommendations that the only change was to restrict our panelists, and that was at our recommendation, to only city residents. And in 2014, we added that community advocate position, part-time community advocate position. So you need to keep the public involved, to keep awareness right in front of City Council. That is a big challenge, and I think if we all work together, we can keep that focus on them. Thank you.
Thank you for your insights. I think what are the key themes is that we need to be engaged with the Police Accountability Board, the Alliance, and the Center for Dispute Settlement as it relates to police accountability. I think that our voices, we need to use our voices to advocate for City Council in continuing its funding, appropriate funding and adequate funding for the Police Accountability Board. And the focus of our events is to have informed citizens and voters, and as the new season of political activity, we need to keep what we've heard this evening in mind as we move forward. So I thank you for your input. We'll now open it up for audience questions, where we will have a little bit of time for that. And so we'll have Ms. Jackie McClaney, who will lead the Q&A session. And we ask those who are with us on Facebook, please put your questions in the chat.
Good evening, everyone. We have quite a few questions that are in our chat, approximately 8 at this time. So if time permits, I would like to go through, ask the several different questions. Our first question is, the FBI intelligence reports have confirmed that white supremacy have infiltrated law enforcement. How is this being explored?
I'd love to answer that one. So,
Go for it.
so that was one of our, one of the things we spoke about last night was about the idea that, you know, that RPD may have a culture problem, you know, that we think that it should be explored, and we actually recommended in our answers that it be explored, the idea of white supremacy and the idea that that needs to be explored further. You know, we know that there were that there have been allegations, or we think that there have been allegations. I want to say think, because I can't confirm that outright. Allegations of discrimination within the police department of Black officers, brown officers, women, right? And we think that there should be a open, transparent process in which, you know, citizens can ask and see these questions. We actually asked for 50 different metrics of the Rochester Police Department to be made public. And, you know, I wonder if, you know, an open examination into white supremacy or institutional racism, even, let's just start with that. Institutional racism in the department, and is that something that the department deals with, or is that something that they are addressing? Let's just start there. So yes, that's how I would, I guess, address that.
Would anyone else like to add to the answer?
You don't have to look any further than the disparities in our judicial system to see, and it's not just the Rochester Police Department and policing in general in this country. It really, it goes back to to the birth of our country and the birth of policing in the mid 1800s. But if you want to look at the data, you don't have far to look. Look at the number of Black and brown people, the percentage, the disparate percentage of them that are involved in our judicial system, and that their entree into that is through our police force.
Thank you. Okay, this is a little similar question. Beyond implicit bias training, what about cross-cultural communication workshop along with cultural humility workshops?
I can speak to that.
Go ahead, Frank. Yeah.
Yeah. So I see Pastor Wanda Wilson is with me, with us this evening. So we've been working with a subcommittee of the UCLM group, developing a curricula for new recruits. What we're proposing as part of the UCLM response to the governor's recommendations in April is a 20-hour course for police recruits that then will be broken down for in-service training for current officers on an annual basis. That includes implicit bias training, cultural humility, and a large section on the history of policing to make people aware of some of the reasons that we're experiencing these disproportionate numbers contemporarily of Black and brown people being overrepresented in our judicial system. So that's a critical factor. And actually, one of the recommendations that our agency made actually back in 2014 for implicit bias training and cultural humility training.
So I'll piggyback off of that. So I think that's that's I know Pastor Wanda and Frank have been working on that, and that's really awesome. I think that, I know for me, what I envision as a medical professional is that I would like to see a continuing education program. And like, for me, when I go to work, if I prescribe a medication for somebody and I kill them, I'm still responsible for that life, right? And if I have to every year to certify to be a physician assistant, take a certain number of credit hours to prove that I can still practice within the state of New York and within the country. So there are two certifications that I have to do, right? And so, my question is that I would like to, why don't officers have the same, stringent continuing education credits like we have to do, and should that exist? And I know that isn't something that we can answer at the local level. I know that that's a state issue, that there are state mandated programs and continuing education that they have to do. But I wonder if that's something that can be expanded to make sure that we have, one of the things we talk about in medicine is me as a culturally competent provider isn't enough, especially when it comes to Black and brown lives, right? We have to be culturally proficient at doing our jobs. And so same for officers as well. Your cultural proficiency will save somebody's life. And so that's something that I would like to see go forward, and not just, yeah, I think that would be really great.
Anyone else? Okay, our next question. What are the recommendations the PAB have for changing in policies? And does the Alliance have any recommendations for change?
Well,
I'm sorry,
Alliance-
can you say that again, please? You said,
Okay.
I'm sorry, can you just read that question, please, again?
Okay, what are the recommendations the PAB have for changing in policies? I'm sorry, in policing. And does the Alliance have recommendation for change?
So we had 6 core recommendations that we gave to the work group, and I can go over those just really quickly right now. I talked about, so one of those is we wanted an alternative first responder system here, to deal with mental illness. And we believed that, or we thought that, we wanted a dramatic expansion of funding for that program. We wanted social workers to be the first responders on that program, and with the option of calling an officer as needed. We also wanted to have dramatic expansion of services like food, shelter, basic aid. We have models across the country that actually do this and are doing it well, like the CAHOOTS program in Oregon. Second one was trauma-related response systems. We wanted to address one of the things that I'm really passionate about, and same thing with, the medical professionals on our board, is addressing mental health within the officers. And I know for me as a provider, working with patients that have COVID, seeing trauma day in and day out affects my life, and it affects how I interact with other people. And so, if you, I know that, there is a hero culture, hero archetype within policing that, we're the strong silent type. We don't need anything. We don't need anyone. And then, all of a sudden then there's, something happens and they're just not prepared and not ready for a traumatic event. So we wanted to make sure that we had a comprehensive system for monitoring and addressing trauma, because, trauma begets trauma. And if you already have a system that is built on, institutional systemic racism, where, Black and brown people are seen as, hyper aggressive, angry, and somebody that you have to put down, that only adds to the problem. Post-traumatic stress adds to an already volatile situation. We wanted a community-led budgeting process, which is what AJ talked about. Rochester Police Department's budget is 300 times larger than the PAB's budget. That we talked about making sure that we remind city council of that, and that we need money in order to do the things that we're tasked to do. That we wanted to increase, the community needed to have a say in what happens with our public safety dollars, health programs, social services, parks, recreation, and youth. We all need to make sure that the city could commit to adopting a budget that reflects the people's budget. We wanted to ban high-risk practices, which I spoke about: broken windows policing, tear gas, chokeholds, We wanted to stop, like shooting at cars, things like that. And then we wanted department transparency, which we talked about, 50 different kinds of data to be released, everything from recruitment to training to enforcement to use of force on 911 calls. And then we talked about investigating racism in systemic systems of oppression. Mike Mazzio went on record saying that he believes that systemic racism in some way does currently exist within the RPD. We wanted these systems examined, and are they infecting RPD culture, and are they hurting citizens and officers? We wanted to create comprehensive training systems that address these topics in depth throughout an officer's career, not just a little bit. We talked about possibly having continuing education and zero tolerance policies for officers who affiliate and office. So zero tolerance policies and zero tolerance policies for officers that affiliate with supremacist organizations. So that were our, those were the 6 groups. Those were the 6 recommendations that we gave to the working group.
Okay. And does the Alliance have recommendation for change?
I can touch on this. So we don't have our own like comprehensive set of policy recommendations, but we do support the PAB's work on this issue. And there are so many issues and so many like recommended changes that we could talk about. Some of that work is already being done, for example, with respect to, as we know, the vast majority of Rochester police officers do not live in the city. They live in Monroe County, particularly in the suburbs surrounding the city. And then they come into the city and police people, who live in the city. So obviously, many of us have talked about, supporting a push to try to make sure that Rochester, anyone in the police department is actually from the city, or at least, changing the balance here in some way. But that would require a change to state law. And my understanding is that the city has reached out to state legislatures to try to make that happen, like as happened in Buffalo. Buffalo actually recently got an exception to the state law so that they could require their police department to be from the city. I think Rochester could do something similar. So there's a whole host of issues we could talk about, including, efforts to defund the police or to limit the role of police in our community. And I think Shani spoke well about how some of those ways we can implement some of those programs and new policies.
Okay. What is the significant difference between a civilian review board and the PAB?
I could speak to it from my perspective. There are 2 ways to do oversight for law enforcement from my years of experience in the field. The one is the community building approach, which really gets to the heart of our agency mission, is to build community by building bridges between the community and the police. And the other is the watchdog approach, where the PAB is designed as a deterrent model, where sanctions can be imposed for inappropriate behavior. It's just 2 different ways of doing oversight. And so I think in the broadest sense, those are the 2 different ways of approaching oversight. I will mention real quickly, though, there's a third model of oversight that probably could be used with either of the other 2 models in conjunction with that. And that's actually the licensing and certification for all state police officers, where you would establish, as Massachusetts just legislated into law, actually signed by the governor on December 31st in Massachusetts. So they're going to have that licensing agency will be a certifying agency. Any police officer who in Massachusetts, we would propose that for New York, any police officer in the state would have to maintain and sustain their license according to a set of standards and expectations for a police officer. That would really serve in many ways to overcome one of the biggest hurdles, and I think Shani spoke to it extensively, is the challenge from police unions. If in fact this agency that certifies police officers had oversight and investigative powers and had the authority to sanction officers or remove their certification, and their certification were to be stripped from an officer, they could no longer serve. And that would remove it from direct independent union control in individual cities. So it's a brand new concept that's coming up that I think works with either the community building approach or the police accountability approach, that really deserves a serious look, and hopefully we'll gain some experience as to how that goes over in Massachusetts, and that would obviously require legislative change, but I think it has a lot of potential to really help to overcome one of the biggest hurdles, and that's the resistance from police unions.
Okay, thank you. This might be a good follow-up question with that. What is the PAB doing to review training manuals and police policies?
So we will be doing both. We will be reviewing police policy and training manuals. So we are not in the process of, I think the first thing that we're going to be looking at is police policy in regards to how they interacted with protesters. You know, again, there is so much police policy to look through. And so we're taking it like, this is the first, after the working group is finished, this will be our first topic, I believe. So I think we're working on that right now. Training though, you know, we're working with United Christian Leadership Ministry, you know, we're working in conjunction with RPD to take a look at their training. But, you know, just like Frank said, you know, there are state requirements for training that is a state requirement. And so even if we say, you know, hey, you have a certain amount of training for this sort of issue, you know, just like, you know, Frank is saying, it is a very exciting thing to have a continuing education model where there's a metric system by either you meet the requirements for recertifying for your job or you don't. And a lot of different professions across the country have that model and have had it for decades. And it is what it is. Like, if, again, you know, you don't want me taking care of your mom in the hospital if I did not meet my certification requirements. So it is how you gauge my proficiency, along with me testing now it was every 5 years, for now it's every 10 years. But, you know, but those are sort of the things that we want to address when we're looking at training and policy, right? Because there's different levels to look at it.
Okay. Why does the Civilian Review Board rely on police data and police evidence? What is the sustained rate?
Because we operate under that regulation. We don't have independent investigative power. So that's the way it was designed. And, you know, we have made some recommendations to change that, make it more transparent. And as I say, those recommendations have not been adopted. So we just deal with the legislation and the contract we have with the city under the guidelines of city council. I guess, so that's the restriction. We have to operate within the city council guidelines.
Okay. Okay. Are you working with the state attorney general office? Anyone? Are you working with the state attorney general office? Anyone can take that to answer that.
So not at this time, no.
No, we're not. I know that the state attorney general had empowered a grand jury, but I think with the current COVID restrictions, I think they had to halt that grand jury for COVID reasons. And so I think it's kind of at a standstill for a while.
Okay.
If I can chime in on that, I
Mhm.
believe the Police Accountability Board ordinance indicates that if there's a case that comes before the board, once the board gets its investigatory and disciplinary and hearing powers, the ability to investigate these complaints, if the board feels that it would be warranted, they can send that information in the case over to the state AG for further investigation, potentially criminal prosecution of the officer if they did engage in misconduct.
Okay. Thank you. And my final question is, what is the rate of individuals leaving the PAB? And once they resign, is there an exit interview done to gather feedback for improving the board's functionality?
That's a great question. So two people have decided that the PAB was not for them. You know, one just decided that they had other opportunities, and the other went back to school. And so, you know, when I think, you know, meeting with one, and I think one was lost to COVID, and we never had a chance to follow up with them after multiple attempts. The second we had spoken to, and you know, as we knew, there were no problems or issues, but you know, I'd be certainly open to having an exit interview. Absolutely. I just think that we haven't necessarily had a lot of that happen yet. And I know with boards, you know, there are, you know, boards just like every other board in the city, country that you deal with, you know, boards have turnover because that's people move on and do other things. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Cohen. That's the end of our questions and answers.
Thank you, Ms. McLean. I appreciate you presenting the questions to our panelists. So, wow. Let me first say thank you to our audience for joining us and participating and asking those wonderful questions. Special thanks to our panelists, Mr. Liberty, Ms. Wilson, Mr. Derwin, and Mr. Coer. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to be on this Delta Talk broadcast this evening. We're glad that you accepted our invitation, and believe it or not, we really feel like you help inform not only us, but you inform the community about the local efforts around police accountability. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And for our viewing audience, if you want to connect with our panelists or their organization, we will provide a slide with contact information available for you. Also, you can view this Delta Talk broadcast if you want to go back and listen to the questions again or listen to some more points. You can view this broadcast by visiting the Rochester Alumnae Chapter Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Facebook page. Good evening, everyone, and be blessed.